The pyramids of Egypt are maybe the most famous buildings in the world. No other construction has captivated humanity so much, nor generated so many conspiracy theories. The pyramids are old and some of the mysteries surrounding them will remain buried forever. This means they will always be a fertile ground for conspiracy theories. So everyone that reads about them has to choose which explanations to believe and which to discard. The mainstream view is that the pyramids were mainly built as tombs for pharaohs. At first glance, this theory seems hard to believe because for us, it wouldn't make sense the monumental effort to build just a useless tomb. But in order to understand the strength of this theory, we have to understand some religious and cultural particularities of ancient Egypt. First, the Egyptians placed a lot of emphasis on conserving the body after death. They believed life continued beyond death and the physical body was essential to the soul's journey in the afterlife. In a sense, the mummified body was seen as the home of the spirit. Preserving the body meant that the spirit could return to it. So while in other societies it was important to cremate the body after death, probably in order to liberate the soul, the Egyptians believed the opposite. The Egyptians' obsession with preserving the body explains the importance they attached to their tombs. Before the pyramids, large tombs called mastabas were common. These tombs were flat-roofed with sloping sides and served as burial sites for the elite. They usually contained a burial chamber and a chapel for offerings. The next significant development was the stepped pyramid. This was essentially a series of mastabas stacked on top of each other, creating the pyramid-like shape. The pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara is a great example of a stepped pyramid. After the stepped pyramids, they started building true pyramids with smooth sides. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built for Pharaoh Khufu, is the most iconic example. Originally, this pyramid was covered with limestone to create a smooth exterior. What I've just explained is the conventional explanation. A lot of people question it and come with different arguments. One of them is that rarely a mummy was found inside a pyramid. In fact, usually nothing is found in pyramids, and the reason for it is plundering. People always suspected that the pyramids held treasures inside, so shortly after they were built, the plundering began. This is probably one of the reasons why the Egyptians stopped making them. But we'll get to that later. First, let's see who built them and how were they built. For ages, probably since Herodotus wrote it, people believed that the pyramids were built by slaves. As it often happened with Herodotus's claims, it turned out to be completely wrong. The pyramids were built by free people, skilled workers and artisans. Near Giza, archaeologists found evidence that these workers were treated well. They were well fed, housed, cared for when hurt, and buried with honors. In the workers' cemeteries, beer and bread offerings were found, showing that these workers were valued by the pharaoh. One thing that makes ancient Egypt stand out from most other societies of that time is how humane they were by our standards. For example, marriages were often based on love, which was pretty rare back then. This is probably because the Egyptians had a nicer and easier life relative to that period. The Nile flooded its banks in a regular manner, bringing fertile soil. They had to work less to produce food compared to other regions. They were also sheltered from war because the country is relatively isolated, being surrounded by desert. So the good treatment of pyramid builders isn't surprising, it fit their society. The labor was probably seen as a form of religious duty to honor the pharaoh, the divine ruler. Now going to the second question, how they built the pyramids. This is usually the main source of conspiracy theories. A lot of people do not believe that with their archaic technology, the Egyptians would have been able to build the pyramids. What I think is that whenever a society united under a common goal, they managed to create magnificent things. We should not discard ancient people just because they lacked our technology. I already mentioned that Egypt was blessed by the Nile and that compared to other regions they had to work less to produce the same amount of food. This is important because it means that the Egyptians had a lot of free time that could have been used to build things, like pyramids. People sometimes wonder how were they able to transport the construction materials from the quarries to the place of pyramid building. While it seems as a tough task, it's not impossible, and a recent discovery that in the ancient times the Nile had a now disappeared branch, more to the west, that flowed alongside more than 30 pyramids, suggests water played an important role in transporting the stones and granite. There are many examples of native peoples moving stones that weighed multiple tons without using any of the modern technology. These pictures showcase the Nias people of Indonesia that regularly moved stones weighing dozens of tons. One of the hardest things to explain is once the base of the pyramid was constructed, how were they able to lift the multi-ton stones? There are several theories, but this remains an open question. The intuitive answer is they built a ramp, but a straight ramp could not have worked because the pyramid of Khufu, for example, was 146 meters high. A ramp has to be built at a low angle so that the heavy stones can be dragged upwards. Given the height of the pyramids, they would have had to extend the ramp for so long that the task of building such a ramp would have probably been harder than building the pyramid itself. There are alternative explanations on how they lifted the stones at the latter stages of the building process. We do not know which one of these theories are true, or whether they used a method that we haven't figured out yet. There's a lot of proof that the Egyptians themselves built the pyramids, even if some things are yet to be explained. On the other hand, the theories that suggest aliens built them have absolutely no proof to back them up. Occam's razor suggests that we should always choose the simplest explanation, and in this case, the explanation that any rational mind will adopt is that the Egyptians built them, and they were so good at it, we are still puzzled by some details of their construction. Everything ends. The era of pyramids was surprisingly long, an entire millennium. But the day came when the Egyptians moved the last stone meant for a pyramid, and with it, they would forget this activity forever. The Egyptians built pyramids from approximately 2700 BCE to 1600 BCE. We do not know exactly why they stopped, but we've got some strong clues. First is the fact that as soon as the pyramids were built, tomb robbers were a constant problem. It was widely known that great riches are deposited inside, so many people wanted to put their hands on those riches. For the Egyptians, the looting of a pyramid was a catastrophe. The riches stored inside were meant to be used in the afterlife, and if the mummy was stolen and harmed, the spirit's journey in the afterlife would be disturbed. Thus pharaohs were terrified by the prospect that their tombs will be desecrated too. Second is the cost of building pyramids. As expected, they put a hard toll on the Egyptian economy, and after a time, it just couldn't keep up, especially during the periods when Egypt entered a crisis. Priorities changed from building pyramids to surviving, and the generations of engineers that knew the secrets to build them probably did not have the opportunity to pass that knowledge to the younger generations. Since knowledge was passed down by word of mouth, as there were no manuals on how to build things, a single generation's break in building might have erased important knowledge. Another reason might be that their religious beliefs and culture changed. They might not have cared as much about building huge tombs that would puzzle people thousands of years later. Pharaohs started carving tombs in the Valley of the Kings, a secluded place meant to be safe from tomb robbers. But the Valley of the Kings was plundered as well. They also focused later on building grand temples. What's surprising isn't that they stopped, but that they built pyramids for so long. One of the most impressive things about ancient Egypt is how little it changed over thousands of years. Their continuity is unmatched by most civilizations. The Egyptian pyramids are the most famous pyramids in the world, but they are far from the only ones. Lots of civilizations built pyramids, usually without any connection to each other and for different reasons. This again led to conspiracy theories that somehow the Mayans and the Incas and the Egyptians were somehow connected because they all built pyramids. The real reason might be simpler. Let's explore. Civilizations that built pyramids include the Aztecs, Mayans, Incas, Nubians, among others. Each had their own reasons for building pyramids. The Nubians, for example, which were Egypt's neighbors, built pyramids later than the Egyptians, but for similar reasons, tombs for royalty. This suggests that they were influenced by the Egyptians. The pyramids that they built are much smaller and steeper than Egypt's, and unfortunately, many of them were destroyed by this guy. Giuseppe Ferlini was an Italian tomb robber that destroyed over 40 Nubian pyramids and looted their treasures. In North America, the Aztecs and Mayans used pyramids for religious rituals, including human sacrifices, and for watching the stars. Like the Egyptian pyramids, they're amazing engineering feats. Which leads us to the final question: why did all these civilizations build pyramids? The most likely answer is practicality. If you want to build a big structure, a pyramid is the easiest shape. You build a big base and stack smaller ones on top. It's the most stable shape. So it makes sense that civilizations far apart with no connection would build similar structures. Math and physics are the same everywhere. Which means that if there are some aliens somewhere in this universe and they decide to build some big structure, it is likely that they will go for a pyramid too. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.